While my husband was out of town for work, I brought a cake to visit his best friend's widow, fully expecting her to be deep in grief. But the exact moment that front door opened, my jaw absolutely dropped. The officer's name tag read M. Reyes. He didn't hand me the folder right away. He held it the way people hold things when they already know the ground is about to shift under someone's feet. Mrs. Voss, he said. Detective Marcus Reyes, Financial Crimes Unit. I need about 10 minutes of your time. Behind him, Julian's face had gone the color of the drywall. Evelyn's hadn't moved at all, which told me more than any confession could have. That account, I said. I never opened it. That's what we need to talk about. Reyes glanced past me into the house, at the 2 suitcases still waiting by the stairs, like they'd been packed for a trip that had just gotten a lot more complicated. Is there somewhere we can sit? I led him into the kitchen, not the living room. The living room still had our wedding photo above the mantel, and I wasn't ready to explain that to a stranger with a badge. Reyes opened the folder on the counter my grandmother's hands had once rolled dough on. Inside was a copy of a home equity line of credit, First Meridian Bank, opened 6 weeks earlier. $180,000, drawn against the house Evelyn had just insisted 20 minutes ago, belonged to her son. At the bottom of the application was a signature. My signature. Clara M. Voss. I have signed my name probably 40,000 times in my life. I know the small hook on the C. I know how the M leans left before it straightens out. A habit from a 4th grade teacher who told me my cursive looked unserious. The signature in that folder had the hook. It had the lean. It still wasn't mine. I've never been inside a First Meridian branch, I said. I bank at Union Trust. I have since college. The application was submitted online, Reyes said, which is usually how we catch these. Whoever did this didn't expect anyone to look closely. They expected the money to move and the paperwork to sit in a drawer. He turned the page. It almost worked. 162,000 of that 180 was wired out 3 days ago to an account under the name Ashford Family Trust. I felt the floor tilt, just slightly. The way it does right before you understand something you don't want to. Ashford. Chloe's married name. Daniel's name. Daniel, who had been dead 5 weeks. I looked at Evelyn. She was still holding that pot of soup like a woman waiting for a bus. Like none of this concerned her at all. You forged my name, I said. I did what was necessary, Evelyn said. You were never going to sign it willingly. Julian made a sound low in his throat, something between a word and a groan. Mom, tell me you didn't. Someone in this family had to think clearly, she said, and for the first time that afternoon, her voice cracked at the edges. You two were busy being in love. Someone had to protect what your father built. Detective Reyes was writing something down, and I understood then that this was no longer a conversation between a wife, a husband, and a mother-in-law. It had a 4th party now, one that didn't care about feelings at all. Only about signatures, timestamps, and wire routing numbers. Mrs. Voss, Reyes said to me, I'm going to need you to come down to the 2nd District station this week and give us an exemplar, a set of signature samples for comparison. And I'd recommend calling your attorney before you say anything else to anyone in this house. I already had a call to make. I just hadn't expected to be making it twice in one day. Arthur Kessler had been my father's lawyer for 31 years, and mine for the 4 years since my father passed. He met me that evening in his office on the 9th floor of a building on LaSalle Street, still wearing the tie he'd had on that morning, a legal pad already covered in his small, cramped handwriting. Tell me again, he said, slowly. I told him about the forged signature, the home equity line, the wire to something called the Ashford Family Trust. I told him what Evelyn had said in her hallway, that the family needed an heir, that if I couldn't give Julian one, someone else would. Arthur set down his pen. Clara, there's something about your father's original investment in Voss Design Group I don't think you fully know, because your father asked me to keep it separate from your marriage for exactly this reason. He didn't trust Evelyn. He never told me why. But when he put $400,000 into Richard Voss's company 22 years ago, he didn't just buy stock. He made himself a co-trustee of the family trust that holds it. And when he died, that role passed to you. I sat very still. I've never been to a single trust meeting, because there's never been anything to meet about. Until now. Arthur pulled a thick document from a drawer. The paper yellowed at the corners. There's a clause in Richard Voss's will. It states that full, unrestricted control of Voss Design Group transfers to Julian only if he produces a biological heir before his 40th birthday. If he doesn't, control reverts to a 5-person board, chaired by Richard's nephew, Preston Voss, and the company is run as a trust for employee benefit until it's eventually sold. When's Julian's 40th birthday? Arthur checked a second document. 6 weeks from Tuesday. I laughed, and it wasn't a kind laugh. So that's what this was. Not love, not even lust, really. A deadline. I believe, Arthur said carefully, that Evelyn has known for some time that Julian couldn't father a child, and I believe she needed one to exist on paper before that birthday, regardless of where it came from. I thought about every dinner where she'd passed me a new tea, a new supplement, a new doctor's business card slipped into my purse like contraband, every one of them administered with the same soft, concerned smile. I had spent 4 years believing I I was the broken one. I wasn't broken. I was a deadline she was managing. The next 10 days moved the way water moves right before it boils. Small bubbles first, then all at once. Diane Whitfield came recommended by Arthur, a forensic accountant with a CFE after her name and a reputation, he said, for finding money that didn't want to be found. She was maybe 55, silver bob, reading glasses on a chain, and she spoke about spreadsheets the way some people talk about crime scenes. Give me your father's trust documents and Voss Design Group's last 4 years of books, she told me, and give me 2 weeks. She didn't need 2 weeks. She called me on day 6. Clara, I need you to sit down. I was already sitting in my car in a Walgreens parking lot because I hadn't been able to make myself go home. There are 11 transfers over the last 14 months, totaling $340,000, moved out of company accounts and into personal ones under a signatory authorization that traces back to Evelyn Voss. Some of it went to a property management company in the western suburbs. Some of it went to a medical billing office, and a chunk of it, about $90,000, went to Chloe Ashford directly, starting 8 months before her husband died. I gripped the steering wheel. 8 months before. I know how that sounds. Diane, Daniel didn't die until 5 weeks ago. I'm aware, she said, which means whatever this money was for, it predates his death. It predates the affair becoming visible, let's say. I'm not a detective, Clara. I don't build motive. I build numbers, but the numbers are telling me this was planned a long time before anyone walked in on anyone in a hallway. I called Julian that night because some small, stupid, 5 years married part of me still wanted to give him a chance to be a person I recognized. Did you know Chloe was being paid? I asked him. Paid? He actually sounded confused, and for one disorienting second, I almost believed him. Clara, I don't know what my mother handles some of the household accounts. She always has. $90,000, Julian, starting 8 months ago. Silence stretched long enough that I could hear him breathing. I didn't know that, he finally said. I swear to you, I didn't know that. I wanted to believe he was telling the truth. I also understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, that it no longer mattered whether he was. Then who do you think fathered that baby, Julian? Because you can't. He didn't answer. That was an answer. I confronted Evelyn myself on a Tuesday, in the parking lot of her building, because Arthur had told me not to go inside her apartment, not to be alone with her anywhere a conversation couldn't be documented. She was coming out with a bag of groceries, and when she saw me, she didn't even set it down. You forged my signature, I said. That's not a family disagreement, Evelyn. That's a felony. I did it for my son. You did it for a company. There's a difference, and I think you know it. Her jaw tightened. You'll destroy this family over money. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I just stopped agreeing to be quiet about what you'd already destroyed. She turned and walked to her car without another word, and by that evening, Arthur had a call from a criminal defense attorney, informing him that Evelyn Voss would not be answering any further questions without counsel present. I understood, watching her drive away, that the woman who'd spent 5 years telling me exactly what I lacked had just told me, without meaning to, exactly what she was afraid of. Chloe found me, not the other way around. She called from a number I didn't recognize, on a Thursday night, her voice small in a way I hadn't heard it in the hallway with the silk nightgown and the curve of her stomach on display like an announcement. Clara, please don't hang up. I almost did. I didn't. I need to tell you something, she said, and I need you to understand I didn't have a choice. Not really. Not the kind of choice you get to make when you're not drowning. She told me Daniel had left her nothing but debt, medical bills from a cardiac condition he'd hidden from everyone, including her, and $40,000 in a second mortgage she hadn't known existed until he was already gone. She told me Evelyn had come to her within a week of Daniel's funeral, not with condolences, but with a proposal. Let people believe the baby, already 4 months along, already unmistakably Daniel's, was Julian's instead. In exchange, Evelyn would clear the debts, cover the hospital bills, and set up a trust in the child's name. I said no the first time, Chloe told me. I want you to know that. I said no. What changed? She showed me an eviction notice with my name on it. Said it was coming in 30 days if I didn't have help by then. Chloe's voice cracked. I have never in my life been that scared, Clara. I said yes because I was scared, not because I wanted to hurt you. I didn't even think about you. God help me. I didn't think about you at all. The baby's Daniel's, I said. Not a question. The baby's Daniel's. There's no version of this where it isn't. I can prove it. Hospital records, conception dating, all of it. I never let it get far enough for anyone to actually confirm Julian on paper. I couldn't do that. Whatever else I did, I couldn't do that. I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment, feeling something strange and complicated that wasn't quite forgiveness and wasn't quite anger either. Chloe hadn't built this. She'd been handed a drowning woman's choice by someone who specialized in engineering exactly that kind of choice. Will you say all of this to Detective Reyes? I asked. The silence on the line went on so long I thought the call had dropped. I'm scared of her, Chloe finally said. Evelyn, you don't know what she's capable of. I do. I'm starting to. I said. That's exactly why you need to talk to him before she decides you're a liability instead of an asset. Chloe didn't answer that night. She didn't answer for 3 days. I found out later she'd left town, driven 6 hours to her sister's place outside Springfield, terrified enough of Evelyn Voss that she'd rather disappear than testify. It was Diane Whitfield who found the thing that changed the shape of everything on a Sunday afternoon in an email with the subject line that just said, "Call me now." There was an attempted wire this morning, she told me. $210,000 from a Voss Design Group operating account. Destination a bank in the Isle of Man. It didn't go through. The compliance officer at First Meridian flagged it for manual review before it cleared, because international wires over $200,000 trigger an automatic hold. Evelyn, I said. The authorization traces to her again. Clara, someone who's this close to being caught doesn't try to move $250,000 overseas unless they think their time is almost up. Sanjay Rao, the compliance officer who'd flagged the wire, called Reyes directly, which is apparently not standard practice, but is exactly what happens when a bank employee reads a fraud alert and recognizes a name already sitting in an open financial crimes file. By Monday morning, Reyes had a warrant for Evelyn's financial records going back 5 years. By Monday afternoon, he had enough to bring the case to the state's attorney. That was the week everything narrowed down to hours instead of days. Arthur called me at 6 a.m. on a Wednesday, which from a 71-year-old estate lawyer meant something had gone wrong overnight. Julian's 40th birthday is 9 days away, he said. If nothing changes before then, the trust clause activates on its own, automatically, regardless of what's happening in criminal court. Preston Voss's attorneys have already filed notice that they intend to enforce it. Meaning what? Meaning if we don't get an emergency hearing to freeze the company's ownership status before that date, Voss Design Group could pass into board control mid-scandal. With Julian and Evelyn's fraud unresolved and your father's original investment tangled up in receivership for years, we need Judge Price to hear an emergency motion, and we need it before Friday. I had never sat across from a judge in my life. I sat across from Eleanor Price on a Thursday morning in a Cook County courtroom that smelled like old carpet and coffee, my hands flat on the table because Arthur had told me quietly the night before that shaking hands read badly to a judge even when the shaking is earned. Price had been on the bench 19 years, Arthur told me, and she read faster than anyone he'd ever appeared in front of. She went through the forensic accounting summary, the forged signature report, the flagged wire transfer, without looking up more than twice. Detective Reyes, she said, your office is prepared to file charges against Evelyn Voss? Forgery, identity theft, and embezzlement, Your Honor. We expect to add wire fraud once the federal partners finish reviewing the attempted international transfer. And Mr. Voss? Julian sat 2 tables away from me, his own lawyer beside him, looking like a man who had aged 5 years and 5 weeks. Julian Voss has not been charged, Reyes said. There's an open question about how much he knew and when. That's still being investigated. Price looked at Arthur. What's your motion, counselor? An emergency order freezing the ownership structure of Voss Design Group pending resolution of the criminal matter and reaffirming Clara Voss's standing as co-trustee under the original will to prevent any transfer of control while fraud allegations remain unresolved. Price was quiet for a moment that felt like it lasted an hour. Then she said, granted, and picked up her pen. And just like that, 9 days stopped being a countdown to disaster and became, instead, 9 days I might actually survive. Chloe came back 4 days later. Not because I asked her to, because, she told me afterward, she'd been sitting in her sister's guest room watching the local news pick up the story of a Chicago design firm's ownership scandal, and she'd seen Evelyn's photograph on the screen, and something in her had simply stopped being willing to be the reason a fraud went unpunished. She gave her statement to Detective Reyes on a Tuesday, with her own lawyer present, a public defender named Rosa Delgado, who'd taken her case pro bono after hearing the details. She brought hospital records. She brought a paternity test she'd quietly had done 6 weeks earlier, one she'd never shown anyone, because some part of her had needed to know the truth even while she was living the lie. It confirmed what she already knew. The child was Daniel Ashford's. There had never, biologically, been any other possibility. I want it on the record, Chloe told Reyes, and I was in the next room and heard her say it through the wall, her voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. Evelyn Voss threatened me with eviction to get my cooperation. I want that documented. Whatever else people think of me, I want that part known. 2 weeks after that, Evelyn Voss was arrested at her apartment at 7:40 in the morning on charges of forgery, identity theft, embezzlement, and attempted wire fraud. Reyes told me later that she didn't say a word during the arrest, just asked once whether Julian knew yet. He didn't tell her the answer. The Voss Design Group board, Preston Voss included, once he understood the scope of what had actually happened, voted unanimously to suspend Julian pending the outcome of an internal investigation and to bring in an independent forensic review of every transaction Evelyn had ever had signing authority over. The company's biggest client, a hospital system that had commissioned 3 buildings from them over the past decade, put a public statement out pausing their next contract, pending clarity. A design trade publication ran a story with the headline, "Family Firm's Future in Question After Fraud Arrest," and by the time it made the local news broadcast, Julian's name was in the same sentence as words like embezzlement and forgery, words that don't come out of a reputation once they've gone in. My divorce, by comparison, was almost quiet. Arthur argued successfully that any prenuptial waivers I'd signed regarding company assets were void given that they'd been built on financial information Julian and Evelyn had actively concealed and manipulated. I kept the house, not because Evelyn had been wrong about whose name was on which document, but because the forensic trail proved my father's investment, and by extension my trusteeship, predated every account Julian had ever tried to claim as solely his. Julian didn't fight it. I think by then he didn't have the appetite left to fight anything. The last time I spoke to him, he called from a number I didn't have saved on a night in early winter and asked if we could talk just once without lawyers. I wanted a kid so badly I stopped asking where the money was coming from. He said, "That's the truth. I didn't want to know. Not knowing felt like innocence. I understand now that it wasn't. You let your mother tell everyone I was broken," I said, "for 4 years, to protect a secret that was never mine to carry." "I know. Do you? Because I don't think you understand what that did to me. I drank her teas, Julian. I sat through her doctors. I believed her. He didn't have an answer for that, and for once, I didn't need him to. I hung up before he could try to give me one anyway." Evelyn Voss pleaded guilty 8 months later to forgery and embezzlement in exchange for the state dropping the wire fraud charge, which her attorney argued had never actually completed and therefore carried a weaker case. She was sentenced to 3 years, with the possibility of parole after 18 months for good behavior. At sentencing, she looked at me exactly once, from across the courtroom, and I understood in that look that she still believed, genuinely believed, that everything she'd done had been in service of protecting something, and that I was simply the obstacle who hadn't understood the stakes. I understood the stakes better than she ever gave me credit for. I'd just refused to let someone else decide what I owed the family name. Chloe had her son in the spring. She named him Daniel after his father and Voss Design Group's new independent trust, administered now by Preston Voss and 2 outside directors, with me as a permanent co-trustee under my father's original clause. Set up a fund for the boy directly, in his own name, with no strings and no silences attached to it. Chloe sends me a photo sometimes. I keep them. I'm not sure either of us fully knows what to call what we are to each other now, but it isn't enemies, and some days that feels like more than either of us expected to get out of this. I started my own small design studio a year later, in a 2-room office above a bakery on Damen Avenue, funded with my share of the settlement and my father's original stake, which had finally, legally, unambiguously become mine. I named it after him, Bennett Studio. Some nights I still catch myself standing in Evelyn's old kitchen in my memory,